There is such a thing as unmistakable glory. And maybe it's that time when you watched a movie that took you miraculously to a different place. I remember the first time I watched The Lord of the Rings, the Harry Potter movie trilogy. Well, actually, it's, I guess, 6 movies, I think. Maybe more. But the first Harry Potter movies that I watched took me to a different place. The Star Wars franchise was amazing. My early experiences with Star Trek were transformational and influenced my worldview, my way of looking at life. They were entertainment, but they took me to a place that was a spiritual awakening. And maybe it's that relationship, that love at first sight kind of a situation where you encounter someone who's just absolutely amazing. And whether you're meant to spend the rest of your life with them or not, there's this undeniable sense of a spark that you can't deny. And even if you never see them again, somehow the fact that they touched your life changed you in a way that you could feel undeniably and yet couldn't really find the words to quantify or express fully. Life gives us these moments of loveliness, of amazement and wonder. And when we see them, we don't need someone to tell us what we're seeing because we just intuitively understand that what we're seeing is glorious. For me, I remember it was playing computer games as a child. It was falling in love with SimCity Classic and SimCity 2000 and some of those old games that don't really look all that great by today's standards. But once I got into them, I got intrigued by them. It didn't matter what was going on. I just was counting down the minutes and the hours until I'd be able to rush over to the computer and boot it up and dive into playing my favorite game again. It could be a job that you love. You know, I've spent a lot of years now working for Walmart, and I started off working for Walmart when I didn't really have any sense of particular loyalty to the company necessarily. I just got on my bike and went to the nearest places that would maybe give me a job as a teenager, and Walmart was the place that hired me. And yet, somewhere along the line, I started to have this sense that Walmart as a company was a meaningful thing. And I couldn't quite put my finger on why. But I had an affinity for the company because when we were low-income people with limited transportation, we would go down to the Walmart stores and we'd do our monthly shopping, and we were poor. But this was an amazing opportunity for me to go out into the world and see a marketplace where things were affordable and there was a lot of amazing stuff you could get. At that time, there really weren't any other stores like Walmart. And I guess today there still, in many cases, aren't any stores like it even still. It's an amazing big tent with a lot of things under the roof of that tent. And I remember a time when my mother bought a computer, and at that time you'd have the computer tower and you'd have a screen that would be in the box and all of the other components like mice and keyboards and stuff. and it would all be in this big box, and they were CRT screens back then, so it wasn't a flat panel screen. It was heavy, it was bulky. And then we tried to take it on the bus, and there wasn't room to take it on the bus. And there was this manager at the store who said, well, you know, you just leave that here with us, and then when I get off work later on, I'll drive it over to your house and deliver it to you. And that's what they did. And so there was this moment, which was going to be an exciting, fun moment, and then it turned into a little bit of a tragedy because we had a problem. And, you know, back then, I think it was probably $800 to buy that computer, and it was a big purchase for us because we were poor at that time. And somebody just took initiative to take that and make it a good experience. That was a meaningful gesture, and I remembered it. And then eventually I got a job working for a Walmart store, and I guess I always had a fondness because it was a company that played a role in my life as a child when we were just customers. But then years passed, and there were ups and there were downs, and there were a lot of things that I could say today are not perfect about that company. And there were certainly plenty of times when I felt like I'm not really feeling the vibe of it, because it doesn't matter. If you love something, that doesn't mean it's sunshine and rainbows end to end all the time. But there's always been this sense in my mind that it's a meaningful thing to be part of, and I've been proud and privileged to be a part of it. And then I worked my way up, and I moved around to different places in the country because of that company. I was able to have a higher quality of life because of that company. I was able to develop skills that I didn't have otherwise, and you know, turn what would just be a job working at a store into an actual career path. And then in addition to that, to get to a point where I could start to play a role in maybe helping other people to have successful career paths as well, and sort of pass that on. And recently, Walmart built a new home office in Bentonville, Arkansas, and I've been looking at that and watching the progress on this. And it was just recently, a couple months ago, unveiled that it was finished, pretty much finished. And there was a web stream showing it all off, and the governor spoke. It was really just a very nice presentation. And lately, I've been thinking about possibly moving out there to take a position if the opportunity were to arise. And, you know, I guess the point I'm going to try to make with all of this is just that there's such a thing as finding a path where you really love what you do. It doesn't mean that you enjoy everything you do all the time, and it doesn't mean that you don't want to sometimes change your course to some degree. But you can find something that's meaningful to you. Meaningful because it speaks to you on some level, and you really honestly believe that you're on a path that's a blessing to be on. And there's those key people in your life that are a blessing. Maybe it's a job that's a blessing. Maybe it's a hobby that's a blessing. You know, I talk about video games a lot, and I say, well, why is it that, you know, maybe there's an MMO that's really fun, like the New World. New World is an MMO that came out a couple years ago, maybe more now. Anyway, it was a beautiful game. And yet it felt kind of soulless because it didn't have that rich world building and lore and all of the things that a game like maybe, say, Elder Scrolls has, you know? So I found myself thinking, well, there's these beautiful games. I love them. I love something about them, and yet they feel shallow because it takes more than pretty graphics and some ray tracing to make that game that you're going to get collectibles for and put them on a shelf and want to go to a gaming convention and see if you can meet other people who have the same passion for the game. You know, it's just that sense of connection. And you know it when you see it. because one of the main trademarks of this is you start to think, the more you get to know something, the more you know it's imperfect. It's not this amazing thing that doesn't have any flaws, and you know it's flaws. You know there's corruption. You know there's things that are janky about it. You know there's stuff that's not right. And yet, overall, by a long shot, you'd say there's much more good than there is bad. And you'd never want to trade it off for something else. And life should be lived in pursuit of glory. That's the point that I'm making here. We say, well, find something that's okay and then settle for it. But the truth is, life is better spent looking for those mountaintops. And the truth is that when you're climbing a mountain, a lot of it is hard work. You're out of breath. You're thirsty. You might be cold, or you might be too warm. It's strenuous. So when I say a mountaintop, I'm not saying it's all just the view from the top. It's not all just the 30,000 feet above the ground view out the window. You have to go through the airport security checkpoint. You have to sit there bored waiting for your flight to start boarding, you know? But then after a while, you look out the window and you get to see what it's like to look at the ground from in the clouds. And you say, wow, this is amazing. But if you don't look for those things, if you don't chase amazing, if you don't think that wonder is what you're looking for, well, life is too dull if you live it just looking to settle. So we should always be looking for things that give us a sense of meaning. And if you don't feel like you have a sense of meaning in your life, you feel like the things you're doing are boring or pointless, or maybe just mundane, well, maybe you need to grow in a different direction. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to walk away entirely. Maybe you just adjust your priorities. But either way, we owe it to ourselves to ask ourselves why we're doing the things that we're doing. Why is it that you believe that what you're doing is a meaningful thing for you? Why are you passionate for the path you've chosen? Maybe you're passionate about something that you love in your life, but you've taken it for granted for so long that you kind of have forgotten why you care. You just accept it at face value that you do your thing because that's what you're supposed to do, but you don't consciously ask that question of why. Why do I believe that what I'm doing matters? Why am I passionate about it? Why do I view this as a source of joy and a source of purpose and a source of passion? And when you start to ask that question, then sometimes you might realize that there's no reason for you to continue on down a course because the things that you're doing aren't giving you joy. They aren't giving you satisfaction on a deep level. They aren't satisfying spiritually. Or maybe you realize that some of the things that you gave up on, some of the things that you have thought were too monotonous or too boring or too pointless, you realize that they aren't really pointless. You just need to renew your faith in them. And when you go through that process of renewal, then you have a chance to be reborn. And sometimes you don't have to walk away from everything. Sometimes you can find redemption in going through a mental reset after you ask yourself why what you're doing actually is meaningful to you. I was watching a video just a little while ago of these folks trying to climb across obstacle courses, and the obstacle courses are suspended far above a valley. They're essentially supposed to walk the tightrope with nothing underneath them. When you look down at the ground, you see what appears to be the risk of a nasty fall to your death. Now, their lives aren't really in danger because they do have a safety rope attached to them. They're not really going to fall to their deaths if they fall off. But as they have to balance and jump across these chasms, you can see that the obstacle course isn't really that hard. Because if the obstacle course was at ground level, they would just jump along and they'd have no problems. But their mind, even though intellectually they know they're safe, their mind takes over and that primal fear kicks in, and they look down and they realize how far down it is. And then their legs get wobbly and they start to be afraid and they start to second guess themselves, and they pause, they falter, and then they start to fall. And I thought about what a great allegory that is, that when we are afraid, that's what makes us fail. The fear of failure makes us fail. The fear of death makes us not live. The belief that we are not good enough makes us not good enough. But somehow, when you stop being afraid, when you surrender that your life is not really yours and you're just a steward of something greater than self, then something miraculous happens, and you begin to live a life based on service instead of ego. You start to do things, not because you're trying to build yourself up, but because you're trying to be a good steward of a precious gift that you've been given. And then you stop being afraid because you think, whether I live or whether I die, my life isn't my own. I'm just here for a little while to try to leave this world better than I found it. And when you start to have that attitude, then more blessings tend to start to come to you. And you start to realize that success isn't as hard as it seems, because instead of looking down and being afraid of the fall, you're looking ahead and you're just taking one step at a time. Life should be lived in pursuit of glory, not monotony. I was talking about one of our colleagues to a coworker just yesterday, someone who seems like they always have bad luck. It seems like there's always some sort of a terrible medical thing that has hit them. They're always getting sick, or there's a tragedy that's befalling them. And I said to my colleague, isn't it crazy how some people seem like they make it through their whole life, and very rarely is there anything wrong in their lives? And then there's other people who can't seem to go a week without something crazy happening. And they're always the victim. It's not like they aren't going through real struggles. It's not that they're deliberately doing these harmful things to themselves. It's just some people seem oddly to be luckier than others. And it's easy to ask why. Why is it that some people have a life filled with blessings and other people have a life filled with pain? Maybe it's just chance. I'm willing to say that's a possibility. But I also think that sometimes it's not just chance. Sometimes it's that when we think positively about life, we attract positive things into our lives. And when we see life through a glass half empty perspective, when we always feel like life is a loss, that the cards are stacked against us, when we always travel down the sidewalk with our eyes shifted down at the dirt, then that tends to be where we go. There's a saying that if you are flying an airplane, or you're racing a car, or you're running and jumping and doing aerobics, or you're axe throwing, whatever it might be, if you want to shoot a target and you want to reach a goal, You have to start by looking at the place where you want to go, not the place that's right ahead. Because if you're looking at the ground, you're never going to be able to meet a target in the sky. So we should live our lives with our eyes lifted up to the heavens, with a sense of faith and hope and glory. And if we can't figure out how to glory in the lives that we have, to glorify a purpose higher than ourself alone, to see good and beauty and blessing in our relationships, in our connections, in the work we do, in the pastimes we enjoy, then we need to change our course. Whether it's changing the way we look at our lives or changing the things we allow in our lives. If we are discouraged, we owe it to ourselves to chart a course of change and not just allow it to always be that way. So no matter where you find yourself, remember it's within your power to choose your attitude toward life. And I think this is very important because when we say it's within our power to do something about the condition of our lives, when we say that our happiness is up to us, that implies control and responsibility. It means we're not victims. It means that if we're having a bad day, then we can change our attitude right now. It's not dependent on someone else doing something. And there's a lot of people who would say, well, if I won the lottery today, then I would be happy. Or if I had the perfect relationship, or if I got a raise or a promotion, I'd be happy. But people who are innately unhappy never are happy just because they get a quick win. Life is something that you have to learn to love. And if you understand that it's within your power to do that, then you can stop being stuck in that victim mentality. And you can start truly charting a destiny for good in your life. And when you start to lift up your eyes and live a life of encouragement and hope instead of discouragement and loss, that also puts you on a path to be able to do good in the lives of others, to be free from fear and focus on doing good every day. Now, in closing, I would say this. It's a challenge I have for myself, and it's a challenge I would think everyone would benefit from sharing. Try your best every day, every hour, every minute to know what you're doing right now and to know what you're doing next. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't change that up. It doesn't mean that something can't affect your plans and make you do a 180. But so much of our lives wind up being lived on autopilot. So much of our lives, we wind up getting to a point where we just feel tired, wiped out, and then we retreat to the couch and we start scrolling on our phones. We're not really resting. We're not really living. We're just sort of in standby mode. And then we wonder why it is another weekend goes by and we didn't do the things we wanted to do. We didn't pursue our hobbies. We didn't have time for our friends. We didn't accomplish the things that have long been on our bucket list. So be mindful and allow yourself to do whatever you want. I'm not saying that you have to be a more disciplined person in terms of what activities you choose to do. Just be deliberate in what you're doing. If you want to scroll on your phone and look at Reddit for 2 hours, then then by all means, you can choose to do that. But I think the reality is, many times, if we actually made a mental choice to do something or not to do something, we would probably prefer not to spend our time the way we do. If we actually thought about the things we were going to say before we say them, we thought about the type of thoughts we were going to harbor before we meditated on them, we would be tempted to be more optimistic. We would say that we would rather be more tolerant. We would say that we'd rather be more truthful. We would say that we'd rather do fewer things and do them more mindfully, more fully, and be more grounded in the present instead of being always plagued by distraction. These are things to think about. But as we seek to experience life as a glorious experience, sometimes the first step is to learn to understand how to experience life fully. Because you can't process how you feel about life if you aren't actually able to pause and think and have space to breathe. So start by tuning out the distractions that keep you from asking and contemplating and thinking. And then in that unnatural empty space, when you've put down the phone and you've stopped watching the YouTube videos and so you stopped scrolling the news feed, in that quiet place, ask yourself why the things you're doing are meaningful to you. And if you can't answer that question, then consider getting rid of some of the things that are just meaningless noise, that aren't edifying or spiritually uplifting. And then with whatever remains, after you've gone on a content fast and purged yourself from all of that superfluity, then renew your faith in the things that have always given you a sense of hope, a sense of passion, and a sense of purpose. And live your life being thankful for the job you have, for the relationships you have, for the opportunities and experiences you have. And don't allow yourself to have anything in your life that you aren't truly grateful for. As always, life has loveliness to sell, so buy it and never count the cost. Thanks so much, as always, for watching.